Okay, great. Well, thank you. Welcome, Miles. And I so appreciate you taking time today because I know you had a big announcement today and everything. So, um, which you can talk about if you want. But, you know, I have wanted to kick off this series that I'm doing to kind of dovetail with some of the research that I'm doing on my book, which is on complicity and moral courage.
It's a
And
good moment to be talking about both.
it is a good moment to be talking about both. And earlier this month, I had Catherine Sanderson, who's a psychologist, and she talks about, she studies kind of bystander psychology, like what keeps people
Um,
from speaking up, et cetera. And so, I wanted to pair kind of some of those, insights from scholars and psychologists with people who are doing, who are meeting the moment right now. Because one of the things that she talks about is first that courage is contagious, that we get empowered by seeing others and seeing the example of others. But also, like, I'm just really interested in your story because it's been a journey. And I just wanted to, I personally, for my own knowledge and research, want to do this, but I also want to share it with my group. So welcome, and that's the background with which I'm bringing you on. And of course, if people have, questions about the current moment and everything that's going on, that, because I know you're very active on Substack and notes. I love your notes as well. So people should feel free to ask that. So
yeah,
welcome.
I appreciate it, Asha, and I would also say, no questions off limits, folks. I mean, you know, the only reason I'm still out here speaking about all of this is just in the hope that, as Asha noted, it helps reduce the cost for other people. But it's, the whole experience has been rife with landmines and, unpleasant moments and all of that. And also, I would say, my comment about the first Trump administration has been that there were no heroes in the first Trump administration, just survivors. And I'm happy to talk in whatever detail folks want about that journey from basically being on one side of that line between courage and complicity is, sort of in a somewhat naive fashion went into that administration thinking, well, we unelected bureaucrats can help keep this in check from the inside. I mean, I was no Donald Trump fan from the beginning in the GOP. Some of those, naive presumptions weren't naive. Some of them were valid. Others, didn't pan out the way that we hoped. So anyway, happy to walk you through any element of that moral choose your own misadventure. And nothing's off limits. So, Asha, happy to start wherever you want. I'm happy
Yeah,
to
I
give
mean,
some
I
background or not, or just go
I
into
would love
questions.
some background. I would love to kind of just start with, you know, um, what led you to be working in DHS in the Trump
Yeah.
administration? Like, kind of what was your background? What was your worldview, philosophy, et cetera? Um, I mean, even before Trump was
Yeah.
elected, do you consider, did you consider yourself like a conservative? And, did you work in other, I think you worked in other presidential administrations. So in other words, I would just like kind of like the baseline
Yeah.
miles
So
that
I
that
came
was
into
coming in.
Washington, in some ways, my motivation for public service not dissimilar from things that Asha did, namely 9/11. I mean, a lot of folks were inspired to go to the national security community because of 9/11. I came out to Washington D.C. after that, and my first job in D.C. right after 9/11, I still contend was the best job I've ever had. I was a lowly congressional page, the lowest you can possibly be on the totem pole on Capitol Hill, except for the fact that despite being the lowliest employee on Capitol Hill, you have the literal best desk in all of Washington, D.C. So my desk was in the back corner of the House chamber as a congressional page. And so in the wake of 9/11, for a year, I had this little bird's eye view as a congressional messenger of what was happening in the citadel of democracy. And you sit there in the back of the chamber, you hear members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, crossing the aisle, literally trying to build new things like the Department of Homeland Security and break down silos and sharing information. That rocked me in a good way. I was totally inspired by the bipartisanship I was seeing in Congress. And it's everything that you don't hear about public service. So that's where I started my career. I ended up working my way up in DC and worked in the Pentagon under the Bush administration, worked in Vice President Cheney's office under Bush, came back to Capitol Hill, where I spent about a decade toggling between the House Appropriations Committee and the House Homeland Security Committee, basically two committees where I was helping oversee the budget and programs of the Department of Homeland Security, was working under Paul Ryan when he was the speaker. And as Asha notes, I was a lifelong conservative. I actually remain an ideological conservative. If it matters to folks, a Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, small L libertarian, probably someone you would completely disagree with on a lot of policy issues. Some of you would disagree with on a lot of public policy issues. But as Donald Trump rose up in the Republican Party, it was clear to me that there was something vastly more important than protecting America against foreign threats, and something vastly more important than my libertarian ideology, which is that there were threats coming from inside the House. The man, from the start of his presidential candidacy, had very clear anti democratic, as in the rule of law, sentiments. And some viewpoints that I saw as deeply contrary to the conservative movement. So, of the 16 people who were in the field in 2016, the 16 Republican candidates, Donald Trump was dead last on my list. And I helped Paul Ryan, when he was House Speaker, draft something that behind the scenes the speaker called the Trump inoculation plan. You've never heard of it because we failed spectacularly. We had these meetings with Paul Ryan in the Capitol, where we were focused on how to stop Donald Trump from winning the nomination. We didn't worry about succeeding. We were confident we would succeed. We were confident Donald Trump wouldn't be the nominee. We just felt like he was doing so much damage to the
What
GOP
month is
brand.
this? Is this, are we still
Mm,
in like,
we are in fall of 2015, just after the Golden Escalator episode, Donald Trump coming down. I think that was in October 2015 when he did that. And so maybe a little bit before then. So
June 2015, I think.
yeah, we're having these meetings. Kevin McCarthy was involved in them too, before he became speaker. He was majority leader at the time, and talking about how do we stop Donald Trump and how do we put out a vision for the Republican Party that's the antithesis of him. So if you're ever bored and you want to go look it up, again, no one's ever read it because Donald Trump did get the nomination. We put out something called the Better Way Agenda. This never happens. A leader in Congress who's of the same party as the person who's the presidential nominee never puts out a plan for where the party's going because the presidential nominee is the one that sets the tone. But this happened in 2016 because Paul Ryan was like, we got to say we're going in another direction. So I was one of the authors of this, very, very self confident that Donald Trump wouldn't win, even once he became the nominee. We were all despondent about him being the nominee. And we all know how that story ended. So Donald Trump wins the election. And I have, unfortunately, for a young conservative, no interest in going into the administration. If any other Republican had won, this is the type of thing when you're a young person coming up in DC where you say, this is the opportunity. This is the opportunity to go work in the White House and work for a president. But I had tried to keep this man from winning and didn't have any interest in being that close to him. So I got outreach from the White House about coming over and being the deputy Homeland Security advisor and taking these other jobs at the White House. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'll stay on Capitol Hill in the safety of the Republican majority. Here's what changed my mind. Uh, Folks maybe don't remember the very first week of Trump's first term, but there was something he did. He passed this travel ban that was popularly called a Muslim ban at the time. And I had done a lot of work on counterterrorism in that moment, and was
Let's
worried
see it.
about ISIS and Al Qaeda. And this plan had no consultation, was legally dubious, was a disaster. And not long after that, I heard from a former mentor of mine, John Kelly, former four-star Marine general who had been named to be Trump's first Secretary of Homeland Security. And the long and short of those conversations with Kelly went like this: Miles, it's not as bad as you think inside the Trump administration. It is so much worse. We need people to come in who understand DHS, national security, and who aren't willing to just say yes to any of these illegal ideas that are flowing out of the White House. And so a few months later, I decided to go in with Kelly. And, he urged each of us that came into his core team to be eyes wide open, that this would probably be a career wrecking experience. None of the people I worked with in the immediate thought this is going to end well. And I mean that very sincerely. I mean, I go back to my, notes at the time to friends and family, and everyone's like, no, stop, don't. I mean, it was very apparent that this thing at some point was going to come off the rails just because of the way Donald Trump was talking and acting in those early days.